Hey there friends, Dave Paulides, CanAm Missing Project, a copyrighted edition for our video channel. Thanks for being here. This is a missing persons edition and just missing persons. Now, in the last month and a half, there's been a lot of news about UFOs. And you think, well, Dave, this is a missing persons edition. Why are you talking about UFOs? If you don't understand, you need to watch Missing 411, the UFO Connection, available on Amazon. And you really need to watch it. And then you'll understand why I have a focus lately in the last year on UFOs. I do think that there's a lot of interaction there that we don't understand. And I've tried to lay that out for you in the movie so that everyone would understand it. So if you want to buy the DVD or the Blu Ray for the first movie, Missing 411, that Ben, my son, directed, or you want to get the DVD or Blu Ray for me on this movie, you can get a hold of me at our online website, NA, like North America, BigfootSearch.com. Also buy all of my Missing 411 books on our website. Don't buy them online. You'll pay about 3 to 4 times as much for the book as you would pay on our site. So, let's get it going. First case involves a man. November 14th, 1996, he disappeared. His name was George Saunders, 54 years old, north of Idaho, Idaho. He was hunting with his son-in-law, a man named Mike Brown, 35 years old, was his hunting partner. Let me explain to you where this is at. They established their campsite at the Bumblebee Campground. This is Idaho right here. That's off of Interstate 90. And it was just east of Coeur d'Alene. This is the Montana border. Very, very close to Montana. This area out in here gets very, very wild, very, very quick. But a lot of things to this story confusing to me, strange to me. He was a resident of Pinehurst, Idaho. And right away when I started reading the articles about this story, it stated that he was partially disabled because he had hip and back issues. Well, that's pretty unusual for a hunter. And they established their camp at that Bumblebee Campground north of the highway. It was supposed to be a 2-day trip, and they were to be home on November 14th. Now, the idea was that they were going to hunt near Forest Service roads in that area of the campground. Well, when the men didn't get home, George's wife, Barbara, called the local sheriff and reported both men missing at 5 a.m. on November 15th, the day after they were supposed to be home. Number one thing, Barbara did right. She called soon after they disappeared. Didn't wait a couple days. If your husband, your significant other is supposed to be home, let's say at night on a Sunday night, it's reasonable to wait that night. Maybe, gotten weather, or they found a deer late, they're cleaning it, whatever. Calling on the 15th at the morning at 5 a.m. Good call by Barbara. Well, on November 14th, the way the story goes, late in the afternoon, the men were driving out of the woods. They hit an icy stretch of road, and their vehicle slid off the road and rolled 3 times. George and Mike were okay. They decided that what they were going to do is pick up all the items in the area where the truck rolled, because things fell out of the bed of the truck, and they were going to pick them all up, put them back in the truck, and go get a tow truck. Well, George told Mike, hey, you take care of the truck, I'm going to hike out, and there's some hunters in the area that they knew about. Get some hunters to help, drive them back to the city, get a tow truck, and we'll come back. Well, that was on the 14th, about late in the afternoon. Well, November 15th rolls around, and in the morning hours, Mike wakes up. Nobody's around. Nothing's happening. And he says, I think I better hike out on this. So he starts hiking out. And he soon came across some hunters. And he got them to help, and they drove him into the city. And at 7 p.m. on November 15th, the sheriff arrived and said, you're reported missing? And he goes, that's not surprising. And so he called George's wife, explained to him what happened, and thought that George had already been in contact with her, but as it was, he hadn't. The wife said, no, I haven't heard from George. And Barbara said that, yeah, I'm the one that called when you guys didn't arrive on the 14th. So the sheriff said that what they'd do is they'd go back out to the truck and start the search from there. And November 16th, the search and rescue finally started. This is understandable because you've got men going every which direction trying to find help, and you got the sheriff trying to find help from different organizations and from the local search and rescue. Well, this was in what was called at the time the Panhandle National Forest. And the sheriff requested canines from Wyoming, which were dispatched. The Shoshone Sheriff's Office and the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office both worked together on this search. The Kootenai County Sheriff said that this was the third hunter this season so far to disappear. And the others were found, but George hadn't been found. Well, they called search and rescue, various volunteers, and they actually called and asked for hunters to come, which they did. And they got 30 searchers on the scene the very next day. And as they started to arrive, the weather started to turn really bad. And they started to get what was called an ice storm. And the branches on the trees started to get real heavy with water and ice. And the sheriff stated 2 days later that it was so dangerous because several of the searchers had been injured by falling branches that had heavy amounts of ice on it. He was concerned. But for the previous 2 days, he had a private pilot that was flying with a passenger looking for George in the area and wasn't seeing anything. Well, a search and rescue team, just by chance, was not far from the area, and they had scheduled a search and rescue drill at the same time. Well, the sheriff had called for him. They were all gathered together, and so this made for a natural transition from drill to reality. And the sheriff got all of those search and rescue people over there, and they started searching en masse. Well, on November 19th, they got the dogs up from Wyoming, and they got some other dogs from Washington. And one of the dogs picked up a scent near where George was last seen. And they tracked him for a couple miles to a tree. And in the area of the tree, there was snow on the ground that was caked down as though somebody was sitting or lying under this tree. They searched around further, and the dog hit on another scent not far away where George had apparently urinated. So the 19th, they were pretty positive they were going to find him soon in that area. Well, they started to search again, and a couple of searchers got injured from falling branches. And it had snowed 5 to 7 inches the night before. They couldn't find any more tracks on the ground. Searchers were being injured. Branches were falling. And the sheriff made a decision that he was going to terminate the search because of the conditions. It was absolutely super freezing cold, and they couldn't find any more tracks because of the new snow. A tough call, but they gave it 5 full days of a big search effort, 5 dog teams. Dog teams tracked to that tree, end of the urination point, but didn't track any further. And The part about this that applies to 411, point of separation. They were hunters, but they had an accident. George decides to separate from his son-in-law, Mike, and he leaves them alone. Something happened. George was disabled. A biggie part of this. Weather played a huge part in the search. Now, there are many notations that they were lost in the area of several creeks and rivers. So you could also say water. Now, the sheriff stated that to several news organizations that George wasn't found. They doubt that he could have lived through those freezing conditions. And they decided to pick up the search the next spring. I scoured archives for days, and I found nothing saying that there was press that covered the sheriff's office going out to search for George, and nothing about him ever being found. There was a notation in a journal of deaths, like a death and marriage certification area, that showed that George died November 14th, 1996. Didn't say he was ever found. Didn't give any other details. But that area of Washington is just east of a cluster zone of missing people in Idaho. So this area in Idaho is just east of a cluster zone in Idaho. Now the story is not in my book. This was found later on during an advanced search on this area regarding some other things that I knew about. And it would only add to the Idaho book, this story. This is nothing I've ever read about, heard about, anywhere in anyone's YouTube, book, anything. I want people to understand that what I'm giving to you today and what I give to you every day is fresh research. I never, ever look at other people's YouTubes, especially missing people's YouTubes. I never look at them. I do look at a YouTube every once in a while, but not missing people's YouTube. I want my research to be independent, anonymous, and fit the 411 profile. Now, we know and you know that a lot of people steal my work, just part of the territory. Yeah, it does get frustrating, super frustrating, mega frustrating, ultra frustrating. But if those people cannot find their own cases, if they can't find their own genre to look under, I feel sorry for them. Copying somebody else's work as a way to make a living is tough. Now, second case, a lot different than the first case. I talked to you a lot about traveling internationally alone. And we had a case just within the last week and a half of a woman I chronicled traveling in Japan alone that disappeared. Traveling internationally alone is dangerous, especially if you're not super familiar with the country and the language. A lot of people can take advantage of you. A lot of people will take advantage of you. And you're always better off traveling in pairs. Pairs are harder to overcome, and two people going into an area, one of you may have your senses go off that something's wrong while the other may not. So, also, always, always, always carry a personal locator beacon if you're traveling alone. It's ridiculous to travel without it. People ask me all the time, Dave, what type of personal locator beacon should I carry? You know what? They're manufactured because they all work. And other people say, well, Dave, you read so many stories of people disappearing. That's right, I do. But extremely few. Less than the fingers on this hand have I ever found people who disappeared with a personal locator beacon. And I only know of one who was carrying a personal locator beacon who was never found. So do they work? The various sites that sell the PLBs have thousands of stories of these instruments that have saved people's lives. Yes, they work. Yes, everyone should carry one. And in a weird kind of way, I'm very surprised that the National Park Service doesn't advertise these and encourage people to carry them. I don't quite understand why, but it is what it is. So this first story involves a young man traveling internationally alone. David Gimelfarb, 28 years old, went missing on August 10th, 2009 in the Rincon de la Vieja National Park in Costa Rica. He's a graduate student, third-year graduate student in psychology in Chicago. And the Highland Park Police in Illinois were handling the case in the USA. This is actually the Costa Rican wanted person flyer for a missing person. This is exactly what they put up. And yes, the reward is not much, but in Costa Rica, I think it would get people on the trail looking, hopefully. Now, a little bit about Costa Rica. I've known a lot of people that travel there. My folks used to go there. They liked it. And my dad was, in his career, he was first a policeman and then became a fireman, and very safety conscious, and said he never felt threatened, never felt in danger of going there. So, of all the countries to go to, probably one of the safer Central American countries. Now, David was on summer break from his third year at school. His parents were Roma and Luda Gimelfarb. Both were Russian immigrants. Everything I read specifically stated clearly that David had no emotional or no mental illness. Now, David left alone for Costa Rica, staying near that national park. On August 10th, he called and also emailed his parents and said he planned to visit that national park the next day. And he said he'd call daily. He was staying at a hotel very near the park called the Chachapalan in Liberia, Costa Rica. Now, the parents and David were very, very close. David was a very honorable son and did exactly what he said he'd do. And when he said he was going to call, the parents knew he'd call. August 11th. David hadn't called. Late in the day, the parents called the hotel and they stated, hey, could you try to reach David's room? They said they did. There was nobody in the room. And the hotel said they would look into it. Not like the hotels here in the United States. These people really take it seriously. Well, the hotel called the parents back on the 12th and stated that David's rented Hyundai Tucson was found locked in the parking lot of the national park, where you would park if you're going in, and it was 3 miles from the hotel. The weird thing is, they had a time-stamped receipt in the car for August 10th. Now, David said he was going to go in the park the 11th. But apparently he went in after he talked to his parents. The park is about 35,000 acres of predominantly jungle terrain. Now, when the parents heard that his car was there and he was not in the hotel, they jumped a flight to Costa Rica. They got there and they talked to searchers, and they stated that David had traveled alone in the past to Israel and to Colorado. And he was a hiker. Obviously didn't know Costa Rica, and he was also safety conscious. Now, local park officials, police, and military got involved. And they took it seriously. They also asked the U.S. Armed Forces to send a couple of Black Hawk helicopters to fly the skies above the park and use their FLIR to see if they could find anything on the ground. And they did, and they found nothing. Now, when the parents got there, the hotel purveyors took them into the room, David's room, and they found his cell phone in the room, which makes sense because there was no cell phone coverage there, and his passport. They knew he'd be carrying an orange, gray, and black North Face backpack. And he also carried a copy of his passport in the backpack. So if that was found, you'd know whose passport it was. I mean, whose backpack it was by the passport. They knew that he would have his wallet with him, a small amount of cash, a camera, and a few other personal items, but really nothing of great value. But the ID factor would have been the passport copy. Now, Costa Rican and Red Cross and military searched for several weeks for David. And the family also hired a local private investigator named Arthur Mitignani. He searched through David's credit card history. Hadn't been used since August 10th. The parents paid to have 2 dog teams from the U.S. to search the park, which they did and found nothing. That expense of flying 2 dog teams in was huge. Now, as time goes on, and I've said this in many, many, many search and rescue reports, that as time goes on, people will start to see David at spots, locals, travelers, etc. When a poster's up everywhere, you start to see the same person all over the place. Not normal. I mean, not abnormal to get reports that David is seen in various areas. There was one weird story that came out. There was no date when this happened, though. There was a man matching David's description with long hair and a beard, described as dazed and confused, that walked into a Coast Guard station belonging to Costa Rica. The Coast Guard people said that there was no reason that they had to stop this individual, so they didn't. But they said that to them it appeared to be David. Again, dazed and confused. He left. And then the military advised that they found an abandoned home in Quapos, Costa Rica. And they found some strange artwork, and they didn't say really what it was. But the parents went down and looked at it, and it was about 175 miles from where David disappeared. So this is the park where he disappeared. This is the road, 175 miles down to Quapos. Now, David was also an artist, amateur, but parents said he was very good. Well, in this abandoned home, they found artwork that was drawn, obviously, by somebody who was just passing through. And it was described as a stylistic similarity to what David drew. Well, that's pretty weird. That's a long way to travel in the jungle, 175 miles. But they didn't give a date when they saw this either, so very hard to say when exactly it happened. Now the park, Rincon de la Vieja National Park. It's a World Heritage Site nominated by UNESCO. And it was the most ecologically diverse park in Costa Rica. It was noted for having several waterfalls where you could swim in the water. Now, I can tell you, because I've been in several places near the equator, in jungle-type settings, when you're hiking along, and it's like 80, 85 degrees, and 100% humidity, it is gross. You want to get in the water, you want to rinse off. They described it as crisp and cool water. They also had heated hot springs and natural thermal springs in the park. And there were several high-end resorts that circumvented the park in that area. Everything I read on that area was that it was nice, safe. There was one article that stated that there were 3 men that had disappeared in the last year in Costa Rica. All generally the same profile as David. Now, does that mean they're all related? Heck no. It was just one article. But then another article stated something super interesting. David was in a fraternity, and one of his fraternity brothers had disappeared in Ecuador. And it was a case I highlighted right here on this channel, and there's a video about it called Austin Felker. I couldn't believe it when I read it. And we always talk here about coincidences. So, 2 students from the same fraternity, one disappears in Central America, one disappears in South America. I call that pretty weird. Yeah, I call that pretty weird. I can remember when I was in college, they had a daily newspaper. I read it every day. I never read about anybody disappearing. And I knew about quite a few people that went to South America and Central America. Now, what happened to David? First of all, the biggest target item I would be looking for would be the backpack. It would be an unusual appearance to the backpack, and because if you went through the pockets, you'd find the passport. That's never been found. Now, the stories about people seeing David in different parts of Ecuador, I give that about a 10% credibility, just because so many times on missing persons reports, you hear about this, and then once the investigation's done, it's found out not to be true. Now to Roma and Luda, I'm devastatedly sorry you lost your son, your only son. And know in your soul, you did everything you could as parents to find him. Hiring a canine team to fly down from the US. Hiring a private investigator in country to help. No, you did a lot. You gave it a great try. I don't know what else you could have done. And there was also statements that you walked the trails looking for your son. Something a lot of us would do if they lost their child. You know, sometimes I go through these cases and I don't get it. Super smart kids, young people, vast amount of education. Austin Felker, David Gimelfarb, same fraternity disappeared? It's beyond me. Beyond me. So friends, thanks for being here. Please share this on your social media sites. And the biggest thing, be nice to people in your world. While the world may be crumbling around us, it costs nothing to be nice. And that nice gesture may just cheer up someone's day. So, we're still on the same sort of narrative of just doing missing persons cases on missing persons videos, and then letters on another. I'm going to do a couple more letter videos to see how the numbers play out before I make a decision about what to do. But thank you for watching, listening, whatever you're doing, and I hope you're safe. And cheer somebody up when you go out today. Paulides out.